Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the very first verse of the Bible. Right from this opening line, you are asked to believe a baseless story. It claims that in the beginning, God created everything from nothing, just by speaking. The heavens, the earth, plants, animals all came into existence because God said so. But is there any evidence that things came into being this way? None. In fact, science today provides strong evidence that completely contradicts this version of events. The Bible also says that God created everything in 6 days. A day here is a 24-hour period. That means God supposedly created the entire universe, including humans, in just 144 hours. According to the Bible, the world should be only about 6,000 years old. This is based on the genealogies and timeline described in the Bible after the creation of the first humans. But science tells us a very different story. Scientists estimate the Earth is at least 4.5 billion years old, a claim supported by extensive geological and astronomical evidence. How did humans come into existence? Genesis claims that after creating everything else, God finally created man from the dust of the ground, fully formed. Then he created a woman from the man's rib to be his companion. But this story raises several contradictions. First, science has proven that humans did not appear in a fully developed form overnight. In fact, no living species we see today, including humans, existed in their present form from the beginning. All life forms evolved from earlier life forms over millions of years through natural processes like evolution and adaptation. According to science, the modern human body is the result of a long evolutionary journey. A different life form gradually evolved into what we now call the human species, through countless generations and transformations. This is the scientific truth. But the Bible in the book of Genesis directly contradicts this. It tells us that all life, including humans, was created in its current form by divine command. This makes Genesis not just unscientific, but completely opposed to what science has proven beyond doubt. The Bible's timeline problem. According to the Bible, God created the world just 6,000 years ago. He also supposedly created the first man in his current physical form in a single day. Science has thoroughly disproven both claims, yet these are central to the Bible's version of history. If the Bible says God created man in a single day, it calls into question the reliability of the Bible itself. Then comes the troubling idea that God created man first and woman second using the man's rib. This not only contradicts biological science, but also promotes a dangerous idea that women are inferior to men. We will explore that issue in a separate video. For now, let's focus on this. The story that God created the world in 6 days and humans from dust is a myth with no scientific basis. Ancient tribal people likely wrote these stories based on the limited understanding of their time. It made sense to them because they had no access to modern science. But today, we know better. How do Christian scholars respond? Now comes the question. What happens if this origin story is proven false? Then the Bible's credibility falls apart. To avoid this, Christian scholars have taken two main approaches. First, the fundamentalists. This group insists that the Bible is absolutely true and that all scientific discoveries are false. They outright reject the idea that the earth is billions of years old or that humans evolved. These people ignore all scientific evidence and blindly follow ancient myths. While they may seem foolish, at least they are being consistent with what they claim to believe. These are the first group, the fundamentalists. The second group are the apologists. These scholars accept scientific discoveries because they don't want to appear ignorant. But they twist Bible verses to make them seem compatible with science. For instance, they say, yes, God created the world in 6 days, but each day actually means millions of years. They try to interpret everything in the Genesis story symbolically in order to hide its incompatibility with modern science. This kind of reinterpretation is an attempt to defend the Bible's outdated stories by redefining words and concepts. They often quote verses like Psalms chapter 90 verse 4, "For 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by." And 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 8, "With the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." But these verses don't say that one day is 1,000 years. They say it's like 1,000 years in God's perception. If we apply their logic consistently, should we also say that Jesus rose from the dead after 3,000 years rather than 3 days? The book of Genesis clearly defines each creation day as a literal 24-hour day. See how he defines day in the following verses. Genesis chapter 1 verse 5. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. Genesis chapter 1 verse 8. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day. Genesis chapter 1 verse 13. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. Genesis chapter 1 verse 19. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. Genesis chapter 1 verse 23. And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. Genesis chapter 1 verse 31. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Each verse ends with, and there was evening and there was morning, the first day, the second day, and so on. This clearly refers to 24-hour days, not symbolic time spans of millions of years. So according to Genesis, God created everything in 6 literal 24-hour days, and man was fully formed in a single day. This directly contradicts science. But here is something most Christians don't realize. The Genesis creation story was not originally seen as symbolic. For nearly 2,000 years, Christians around the world, including the early church fathers and Protestant reformers, believed Genesis was a literal account of history. They believed the world was created in 6 actual days. They believed Adam and Eve were real, historical people. They believed the earth was only a few thousand years old. Why? Because that's exactly what the Bible says. There is no hint that it's a metaphor. It was only after modern science began to contradict these claims, after geology showed the earth was billions of years old, after Darwin introduced evolution, after astronomy revealed a vast and ancient universe, that Christians began to reinterpret Genesis. Today, many try to say it was never meant literally. But this is not faith, it's damage control. It's an attempt to preserve belief in the face of overwhelming evidence. The truth is, if Genesis had agreed with modern science, no one would be calling it symbolic. The reinterpretation only began when the literal reading became impossible to defend. That's why some Christian scholars, the ones I mentioned first, the fundamentalists, simply reject science and stick to the Bible no matter how irrational it sounds. So the conclusion is, you have to make a choice. Either accept Bible's mythical version of creation as literal truth, or accept the overwhelming scientific evidence about the origin and evolution of life. Trying to do both, claiming that science is true and the Bible is also literally true, is not just intellectually dishonest, it's laughable.